The galaxy had known peace for a brief moment, but peace was fragile, and war always loomed close on the horizon. The Terran Coalition, the united force of humanity, had just emerged from a devastating war with the Grastok Empire, a vicious and technologically advanced alien species. The Coalition's military commander, Caladre, stood before the Grastok Empress, Zanara, in the massive hall of the neutral station, a place built for negotiations but filled with tension. The air was thick with the weight of the past battles, the burned worlds, the lives lost. They had fought for years, but now the time for diplomacy had come. And yet, as the negotiations began, the Terran delegation was thrown into confusion by a strange demand. Empress Zanara, tall and imposing, with shimmering scales that reflected the light of the distant stars, leaned forward in her seat. Her crimson eyes, sharp and calculating, locked onto Commander Kayla. The room fell silent. Her voice, though smooth and regal, carried a heavy authority. "I demand a human," she said, her words echoing in the cold chamber. "One human as my prize." The Terran diplomats exchanged uneasy glances. The war had just ended. Why would the Empress ask for a human as a prize? Was it some kind of twisted victory claim? Commander Kayla was baffled, her mind racing to find meaning in Zanara's cryptic request. No one understood the purpose behind it. Humans had fought fiercely against the Grastok for years. They had won, at a great cost. Yet Zanara, the most powerful leader of the Empire, now wanted a human. The Grastok Empress's eyes never left Kayla's as she spoke again, her tone almost soft, as if she had been expecting the confusion. "It is not a demand for submission," Zanara explained, her words deliberate. "I seek a representative, a symbol, a human who will show me the strength of your people, a prize for the knowledge you hold." The room hummed with a mix of disbelief and fear. The humans had no idea what to make of the Empress's request. Commander Kayla's eyes darted over to her colleagues, all of them clearly unsettled. Why would Zanara choose this moment to demand a human when the Grastok had just been defeated? What was she trying to achieve? Was this a test of some kind? And if so, why not a warrior or a diplomat? Why a human? The Terran delegation's leader turned to her officers, clearly searching for answers. Among them stood Lieutenant Ryland Soren, a young officer who had made his name on the battlefield. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with short-cropped dark hair and sharp blue eyes that had seen more than his years should have allowed. He stood a little apart from the others, his gaze never straying from the Empress. Kayla's voice cut through the tension. "Very well," she said, her eyes narrowing. "We will choose one human to represent our people, but you will explain your reasons." Zanara smiled, her expression unreadable. "In time," she said, "you will understand." Ryland's heart pounded as he realized something. He might be the one chosen. There was no other option. And if he was, the answers he sought might only come when he stepped onto the Grastok homeworld. But for now, he would have to play his part in a game far larger than any war. As the days passed, the Terran delegation scrambled to make sense of the Empress's strange demand. Commander Caladre spent sleepless nights deliberating with her officers, but no one could understand why Empress Zanara would want a human, especially now that the war was over. Was it a challenge, a test of sorts, or was it something more? She could sense the uneasy tension among her crew as everyone tried to make sense of the request. And then the order came. Lieutenant Ryland Soren, the young officer who had gained a reputation for his bravery during the war, was chosen to be the human representative. He wasn't sure whether to be honored or terrified. He wasn't even a senior officer. He had always been a soldier, one of the many who fought on the front lines. But now, for reasons he couldn't yet understand, he was being selected for something that felt far greater than anything he had ever imagined. Ryland was not the highest-ranked officer, but his history was one that had drawn attention. He had survived battles that had shattered entire fleets, and somehow, he had lived when so many others had died. People who fought beside him always spoke of his strange ability to adapt to the most hopeless situations, whether it was using wreckage as cover or outsmarting enemy commanders. Rylan had the kind of mind that made him unpredictable in ways the Greystock had not anticipated. His tenacity had earned him respect, even from their enemies. Now he was going to the heart of the Greystock Empire. The thought of leaving Earth behind, of stepping onto a foreign world so unlike his own, made his stomach churn. The Terran coalition had just begun to rebuild after the war, and Rylan knew that whatever happened next, his life would never be the same. With only a few hours before he was to board a transport ship bound for the Greystock capital, Rylan found himself standing on the balcony of the station, looking out at the stars. The vastness of space felt overwhelming. He had fought in its cold darkness, but now, as he prepared to face the heart of an alien empire, it felt more alien than ever before. "Are you ready for this?" Kayla's voice interrupted his thoughts. She stood beside him, watching him closely, as though trying to gauge his readiness. "You've been chosen for a reason. Don't forget that." Rylan glanced at her, his blue eyes hardening with resolve. "I know," he said quietly, "but I still don't understand why her. Why a human?" Kayla didn't answer right away. She simply gave him a serious look, as if weighing the situation carefully. "Sometimes, the reasons don't make sense at first, but you'll figure it out. Just remember who you are, Rylan. You're not just a soldier. You're a symbol now." A symbol. Rylan wasn't sure he liked the sound of that. He didn't feel like a symbol. He felt like a pawn in a game much bigger than anything he had ever signed up for. But he knew he had no choice. The ship waiting for him would carry him across the galaxy, to a place where humans were just a distant curiosity to the Greystock. But it was his mission now, and he had to make it work. As the transport ship's engines roared to life, Rylan sat back in his seat, preparing for the unknown. The answers he sought were far away, in a world where even the air was different. But the journey had begun, and with it, a challenge that no one, not even Rylan, could predict. The journey to the Greystock homeworld felt like an eternity to Lieutenant Rylan Soren. The sleek transport ship that carried him to the heart of enemy territory moved through space with an eerie silence, its hull glowing faintly in the dark vacuum. As he sat alone in his small quarters, his mind raced with questions. What did the Empress truly want with him? Why had she chosen a human? He had never felt more like a stranger in his own skin. When the ship finally entered the atmosphere of the Greystock capital, Nearthar, the view outside the observation window was both breathtaking and terrifying. The sky above was a strange shade of purple, with swirling clouds of energy that looked like they could tear apart a fleet with a single strike. The towering spires of the Greystock capital city loomed ahead, gleaming with a strange metallic shine. The city seemed alive, its structures pulsating with power, each one taller than any building Rylan had ever seen on Earth. Upon landing, he was escorted by a pair of silent, massive Greystock soldiers, creatures with reptilian skin and glowing orange eyes. Their presence was unnerving, their long claws clicking against the metal floors of the ship. They did not speak as they led him through the halls of the Empress's palace, but Rylan could feel the weight of their gaze. The air smelled different here, thick with a strange mix of metal and something like sulfur. It was a harsh, alien world, yet, somehow, it felt as if he was being drawn into something greater. When they arrived at the central chamber, Rylan's breath caught in his throat. The room was vast, stretching higher than he could see, with walls made of smooth black stone that shimmered under the light. At the center of the room stood Empress Zenara, her figure as imposing as the city itself. She was taller than any human, with long, glistening scales that covered her body. Her eyes, glowing a deep crimson, were fixed on him, studying him like a scientist observing a specimen. Zenara's voice broke the silence, her tone smooth and measured. "Lieutenant Soren," she said, her words carrying a weight of authority. "Welcome to Nearthar. I trust your journey was comfortable." Rylan stood at attention, trying to remain calm despite the overwhelming presence of the Empress. "It was Your Majesty," he replied, his voice steady, though his heart raced. He had heard stories about her, stories of her strength and intellect, of how she had once led her people to conquer entire star systems. Yet now she seemed different, as if she was searching for something, something only humanity could give her. "You wonder why I asked for you," Zanara said, as if reading his thoughts. "I can see it in your eyes. You think I desire your species as a prize, a token of victory. But I tell you this, it is not so. You are here because you represent something far more valuable to me than any other victory." Ryland's confusion deepened, but his curiosity grew as well. "Then why, Your Majesty? What do you truly want from me?" The Empress stepped down from her throne, her movements graceful and powerful. "You humans," she paused as if choosing her words carefully. "You have a gift, a unique strength, the strength to survive in the most impossible situations, to adapt, to fight back when all hope is lost. Your kind doesn't follow the rules of war, it bends them, and that is why I have chosen you." Ryland stood in stunned silence, trying to process her words. Was she saying that humanity's greatest strength wasn't their power, but their ability to think outside the box, to fight differently than the rest of the galaxy? Zanara's smile was small, but it carried a sense of resolve. "You will show me this strength, Lieutenant Soren, and when you do, you will understand why I need you." The next few days were a blur for Lieutenant Ryland Soren. He was thrust into a world so different from Earth that it felt as if he were walking through a dream. The towering structures of the Grasstock capital loomed above him at every turn, their black stone surfaces reflecting the faint light of distant stars. But it wasn't the architecture that unsettled him. It was the constant, watchful eyes of the Grasstock warriors, silently observing his every move. He was a prisoner, in a sense, but there was something more to this place. It felt like an arena, a place where he was being tested. Zanara had explained little beyond her initial cryptic words, but Ryland quickly learned that she had no intention of simply keeping him locked in a cell. Instead, he was to face a series of challenges. It was clear from the start that the Empress wasn't interested in his physical strength, as she had already witnessed the capabilities of the human military. No, this was something different, something deeper. On the third day, Ryland was led into the grand arena, a circular structure made of gleaming black metal. The floor was covered in a strange, almost fluid material that shifted with every step, making it feel as if the ground itself were alive. At the far end of the arena, Empress Zanara stood watching, her crimson eyes fixed on him. She was flanked by a group of her most trusted commanders, their sharp eyes also trained on Ryland. He was given no weapons, no tools, just the challenge. The gates of the arena opened, and Ryland could feel his pulse quicken. He had been in combat before, but this was unlike anything he had ever faced. Suddenly, from the darkness, massive figures began to emerge. Grasstock warriors, each one towering over him, their bodies covered in thick, reptilian armor. They were armed with jagged blades, and their eyes glowed with the cold, predatory hunger of creatures who had been bred for battle. Ryland's instincts kicked in immediately. He didn't wait for them to make the first move. Instead, he darted to the side, using the arena's strange floor to his advantage. The warriors lumbered toward him, but he was already circling behind them, looking for weak spots, scanning their movements. The first warrior swung a blade in his direction, but Ryland ducked and rolled, narrowly avoiding the strike. He had no doubt that these Grasstock soldiers were powerful. They were strong, fast, and incredibly skilled in combat. But what they lacked was the flexibility and adaptability that humans brought to the battlefield. Ryland was smaller, faster, and most importantly, unpredictable. As the fight wore on, Ryland grew more confident. The Grasstock warriors couldn't keep up with his agility. He was darting in and out of their reach, landing blows when they least expected it, using their size and strength against them. Each warrior fell, one by one, as he outsmarted them, using the environment to his advantage. The arena was a strange maze, and he used every corner, every shifting surface, to keep ahead of his enemies. Finally, after what felt like hours, Ryland stood alone in the center of the arena, panting and bruised, but victorious. The Grastok warriors lay scattered around him, defeated but not dead. He had proven that he could adapt, that he could survive. Empress Zinara stepped forward, her eyes glowing brighter than ever. She gave him a small, approving nod, though her face remained impassive. "You are not like the others," she said. "You think in ways that none of us have anticipated. That is why you are here." Ryland's chest swelled with pride, but his mind was still racing with questions. Why had she pushed him to this extreme? What was the true purpose of all this? And why did it feel as if he had just passed the first test of many? Zinara turned to her commanders. "This human has shown me something none of you have. He has passed the first trial. There will be more." Ryland's heart sank. He had won this challenge, but it was only the beginning. After the trial in the arena, Lieutenant Ryland Soren couldn't shake the feeling that something much larger than himself was unfolding. His victory over the Grastok warriors was met with cold approval from Empress Zinara, but her eyes never gave away what she was truly thinking. She had kept him alive, kept him fighting, but each passing day felt like another layer of the mystery that surrounded him. He was more than just a prize now. He was a pawn in a game he didn't understand. For the next few days, Ryland was given little rest. He was kept under close watch, but his movements were no longer as restricted as before. He could wander the palace grounds, but always under the watchful eyes of the Grastok soldiers. Despite the luxury of his quarters, Ryland couldn't escape the feeling of being trapped. Every corner of the palace seemed to hide something dark and dangerous. There were whispers among the palace servants, the few who dared speak to him, but their words were always hushed, as if they feared being overheard. It was one evening, when the dim light of the twin moons cast long shadows across the palace courtyard, that Ryland found himself in the company of one such servant. A woman, slender and quick-moving, approached him cautiously as he sat alone by the courtyard's edge, overlooking the shimmering lake that stretched endlessly into the distance. Her name was Lyra, and she had been assigned to bring him his meals, though she seemed to linger longer than necessary. "You've been chosen for something important," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "But it's not what you think. There's more to the Empress's trials than just strength." Ryland turned sharply to face her, his instincts alert. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice low but urgent. Lyra glanced nervously around, making sure no one was nearby. "I've seen it before," she continued. "Humans, you have a power that none of us can understand. It's not just your ability to fight, but your ability to survive, to endure. The Empress wants to understand it, to use it. But it's not a gift for her people, it's a curse." Ryland frowned, confused. "A curse? What are you talking about?" Lyra's eyes grew wide with fear, as if she had said too much. "You don't know. The Grastok were once a dying race, on the brink of extinction. They needed something that could give them an edge, something to allow them to thrive again. The trials, the tests, they're all about extracting that power. The Empress has been obsessed with it for years." Ryland's mind raced. The Empress had always been one of the most feared and respected leaders in the galaxy, but this revelation made him see her in a new light. If what Lyra said was true, Zinara was not just testing him. She was searching for a secret hidden deep within humanity, a secret that could change the fate of entire civilizations. "Why me?" Ryland asked, his voice hoarse. "Why am I the one she chose?" Lyra hesitated, her gaze flicking nervously to the side. "Because you're different. You survived the war. But more than that, you survived when others didn't. The Empress believes that humans can endure beyond what the Grastok ever could. She believes you have the answer to saving her people." Ryland's thoughts spun. He was more than just a human prize. He was a key to something far bigger than anything he had ever imagined. And now he was trapped in the middle of it. He had to find out the truth before it was too late. Lyra stepped back, her eyes filled with sadness. "Be careful, Lieutenant. The Empress may not be what she seems." Ryland stood in the silence that followed, his mind burning with new questions. The Grasstock Empire's thirst for power was greater than he had realized, and he was the one who might hold the answers. Answers that could either save or doom both humanity and the Grasstock. The more Lieutenant Ryland Soren learned about the Grasstock, the more he felt like a piece on a chessboard, one that he couldn't fully understand. Every step he took seemed to lead him deeper into a mystery that with each passing day became harder to escape. Lyra's warning echoed in his mind. The Empress was searching for something hidden in humanity. But what exactly was that something, and how did it relate to him? Days passed in a blur of strange rituals, cryptic conversations, and endless tests. The Empress didn't seem satisfied with just physical trials anymore. Now, Ryland was being subjected to mental challenges. He was forced to solve complex puzzles, to outthink holographic simulations that mimicked dangerous battle scenarios. He had to navigate shifting environments, react to attacks from invisible foes, and make split-second decisions. It felt like the Empress was stripping him bare, forcing him to confront his every strength and weakness. Ryland grew weary, his mind stretching to its limits. Yet no matter how hard the challenges became, one thing stayed the same. Every test was an opportunity to show his humanity's resilience. It wasn't just about surviving, but thinking through the chaos. That was the power the Empress craved. He could feel it, even in the small moments when he managed to outsmart his opponents in these trials. One evening, after a particularly grueling mental exercise, Ryland found himself alone in his chamber, exhausted and contemplating his next move. The air felt thick with tension, as if something was on the verge of breaking. Suddenly, a sharp knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. "Lieutenant," said Commander Varric, one of the Empress's highest-ranking officers, his deep voice filled with authority. "The Empress requests your presence." Ryland's heart skipped a beat. He had been summoned countless times before, but this felt different. The air in the palace was changing, and it felt like the calm before a storm. Ryland nodded, pushing aside his doubts, and followed Varric through the winding halls toward the heart of the palace, the place where the Empress herself resided. When they arrived at the throne room, Ryland saw that the Empress was not alone. Surrounding her were a group of elite Grasstock generals, each one as imposing as the last. But what stood out the most was the object sitting on a pedestal in the center of the room, a small, crystal-like artifact, glowing faintly with an inner light. Cenera's eyes met Ryland's, and for the first time, there was no coldness in them, only something deeper. "Lieutenant Soren," she began, her voice calm, but with an undeniable edge of excitement. "You have performed well, but the time has come to reveal the truth." Ryland's pulse quickened. He had been waiting for this moment, the moment when everything would finally make sense. "What is this?" he asked, his gaze locked on the artifact. Cenera smiled, a rare expression for her. "This, Lieutenant, is the key to everything. Your people have a unique gift, a gift that I spent years researching. Humanity's ability to adapt, to survive. The very thing that makes you dangerous to our enemies makes you invaluable to us." She gestured to the artifact. "This is the culmination of that gift, the power you humans unknowingly hold within." Ryland's mind raced. Was the Empress saying that humanity's survival instinct was something more than just a will to live? Something that could be harnessed, controlled? The Empress continued, her voice filled with conviction. "This artifact will unlock that potential, amplify it. Once I have it, I can ensure the survival of the Grasstock, make us stronger than ever before. And you, Lieutenant, will be the key to unlocking it." Ryland stared at the artifact, his chest tightening. The power she sought, his survival instinct, wasn't something he could give away willingly. He understood now why she had chosen him. She wasn't just after a human prize. She was after humanity itself, its very essence. And if she succeeded, it could change the galaxy forever. The weight of the Empress's words hung heavily over Lieutenant Ryland Soren. He stood frozen, staring at the glowing artifact in the center of the throne room, his mind reeling from the revelation. What the Empress wanted from him was nothing less than the essence of humanity's survival instinct. She wanted to harness it, control it, and use it to ensure the dominance of her people, the Grasstock. And it was clear now that Rylan, by mere existence, had become the key to unlocking this power. His heart raced as his thoughts spun in 1,000 directions. He could feel the weight of the choice before him: help the Empress, and risk humanity becoming enslaved to her will, or refuse, and face an uncertain fate. But as he glanced around the room, he saw the cold, calculating faces of the Grasstock generals, and it became painfully clear that no matter what decision he made, there would be consequences. Zanera's voice broke through his inner turmoil. "You see, Lieutenant, your strength is not in your muscles, nor in your tactics. It lies in your will to survive, to overcome impossible odds. The Grasstock need that. They need to become that. I've spent years studying your kind, and now I will unlock that power, with your help." Ryland felt his stomach twist. She saw him as nothing more than a tool, a means to an end. Her eyes glittered with the promise of victory, and for a moment, Ryland almost doubted his own resolve. Could he truly deny her? Could he stand against her and risk everything? Before he could respond, a sudden, sharp noise interrupted the silence. The room's doors flew open, and Commander Varric stormed in, his face flushed with anger. "Your Majesty, there's been a breach." His voice was urgent, and his eyes darted around the room before landing on Rylan. "The human's actions have triggered something. We can't control it." Ryland's pulse quickened. Something was wrong, very wrong. He had no idea what Varric was referring to, but the panic in his voice was unmistakable. Without thinking, he reached for the artifact, drawn by some force that he couldn't explain. He didn't know why, but his hand seemed to move of its own accord. As his fingers brushed against the surface of the artifact, a sudden surge of energy coursed through his body, sharp and overwhelming. He gasped, falling to his knees as the power shot through him, filling every fiber of his being. The room around him seemed to warp and distort, and for a brief moment, he saw flashes of the past, his family, the war, the endless battles. His instincts screamed at him to fight, to survive. The Empress's voice echoed in his mind. "You are the key." But then, just as suddenly, the vision snapped back, and Rylan was left panting on the floor, his body aching from the strange energy. The artifact still pulsed in his hand, its glow brighter than ever. He looked up to find Zanera and her general staring at him in shock. What did you do?" Zanera's voice was barely a whisper, but there was a tremor of fear in it. The confidence she had shown before seemed to have evaporated in an instant. Ryland's mind cleared as the last remnants of the strange energy faded away. "I don't know," he said, his voice hoarse. "But I think it's reacting to me, to my survival instinct." For the first time, Ryland saw doubt in the Empress's eyes. The artifact wasn't behaving the way she had expected. It wasn't simply unlocking his power, it was amplifying it. His human will to survive was more potent than she had anticipated, and it was beginning to affect the very artifact she had believed would give her control. Then, in a split second, it all clicked. The Empress had been manipulating him, using his survival instinct as a tool, but in doing so, she had underestimated its true power. The artifact was a double-edged sword, one that could just as easily turn on its creator. And in that moment, Rylan realized he wasn't the only one in danger. The room was thick with tension. Lieutenant Ryland Soren stood at the center, still reeling from the strange surge of energy that had radiated from the artifact. The once confident Empress, Zanera, now looked unsure, her sharp gaze flicking nervously between the artifact and Rylan, as if she had just realized that she no longer controlled the situation. "How is this possible?" she muttered, more to herself than to anyone else. Her eyes were wide with disbelief, and for the first time, Ryland could see the cracks in her carefully composed facade. Ryland's pulse was still racing, his body burning with the aftershock of the power that had surged through him. He didn't know what had just happened, but something inside him had snapped into place, and he wasn't going to let the Empress use him like a puppet any longer. He knew one thing for certain. If he didn't act now, Zanara would find a way to control him, to use humanity's strength for her own purposes. As his mind raced for an escape plan, he noticed something. Commander Varric was no longer standing with the rest of the Grasstock generals. Instead, he had stepped back into the shadows, his eyes narrowed as if weighing his options. There was something in his expression, something that told Ryland he wasn't fully aligned with the Empress's vision. Ryland's thoughts snapped into focus. He had to take advantage of the chaos in the room, and Varric might be the key. He moved quickly, sidestepping the generals who were still trying to process the unexpected turn of events. With a swift, deliberate motion, he threw a glance toward the commander, his eyes meeting Varric's in a brief but meaningful exchange. Varric's face tightened, but he didn't move to stop him. Ryland took that as a sign. The commander might be the ally he needed. Ryland's gaze then turned to the doors leading out of the throne room. They were guarded, but they were also the only way out. He needed to get to them, and he needed to do it fast. He made a split-second decision and bolted toward the exit, pushing past a few Grasstock soldiers who were still stunned by the events unfolding. The heavy metal doors loomed ahead, and as he neared them, he saw them begin to close, as if by instinct. The sound of heavy footsteps echoed behind him as the Empress's guards rushed to intercept him. Ryland's heart hammered in his chest, but he didn't slow down. This was his only chance. Just as the doors began to slam shut, he dove toward them, his shoulder crashing into the thick, reinforced panels. They jolted open slightly, enough for him to slip through. The cold air of the palace hallway rushed at him, and Ryland didn't look back. He had no time for hesitation. "After him," shouted Zanara's voice from behind. "Don't let him escape." Ryland pushed himself harder, running through the dark, winding halls. He didn't know where he was going, but he knew he couldn't stop. The Grasstock were on his heels, their footsteps growing louder. His mind raced. He needed a plan, something to get him out of this mess. But then, as he turned a corner, something unexpected happened. Varric appeared in front of him, blocking his path. "Lieutenant," Varric said, his voice low but urgent. "You need to go. I'll buy you time." Ryland stared at him, confused. "What do you mean?" "I'm not with her," Varric confessed, his voice tense. "I've been watching you, Soren. I see what she's trying to do. I can't let her win. Go now." Before Ryland could respond, Varric pushed him toward another set of doors, this time leading to an underground tunnel. "This will lead you out of the palace. It's your only way out." Ryland didn't question it. He nodded in gratitude, then sprinted down the narrow passageway. The sound of his footsteps echoed through the dark, his heart pounding in his chest. He didn't know if he could trust Varric completely, but right now he had no other choice. Behind him, the palace was alive with alarms, flashing lights signaling the alarm that had been triggered. Ryland had no idea what kind of trap he was walking into, but he had a feeling that his escape was only the beginning of a much larger fight. Ryland's breath echoed in the narrow tunnel as he ran, his mind a whirlwind of thoughts. The passageway beneath the palace was cold and damp, but it felt like freedom compared to the palace above. The sound of his footsteps reverberated through the stone walls as he sprinted, desperate to escape. He didn't know where this tunnel led, but at that moment, it didn't matter. The alarms were blaring behind him, and he could feel the eyes of the Grasstock searching for him, hunting him down. Every second counted. As he rounded a corner, the tunnel opened into a vast underground chamber. The stone ceiling was high above him, and the air felt heavy with silence. But there was no time to stop. Rylan pushed forward, determined to reach the exit. He had to escape, and he had to do it now. Just as he thought he was nearing the end of the tunnel, he heard a voice that made him freeze in his tracks. Rylan. He turned, his heart skipping a beat, only to find Commander Varric standing at the entrance of the chamber, his face grim. The commander was holding something in his hand, a small device with a blinking red light. "You're not safe yet," Varric said, his voice low but urgent. "The Empress has already sent her forces after you. They'll be here any minute." Rylan's mind raced. He had been running on adrenaline, but now the reality of the situation was settling in. He couldn't outrun them forever. He needed a plan, and he needed one fast. "What do we do?" Rylan asked, his voice filled with tension. Varric hesitated, his eyes scanning the room. "There's a ship in the lower levels of the palace. It's a small escape vessel, fast enough to outrun their forces, but we have to move quickly. You'll need to trust me, Rylan." Rylan's gaze hardened. He had no choice but to trust Varric now. The commander had already shown he was willing to help, and there was no other way out. "Lead the way," Rylan said, determination in his voice. Without another word, Varric turned and began to move toward a narrow staircase leading deeper into the bowels of the palace. Rylan followed closely behind, his hand resting on the hilt of his weapon, ready for whatever came next. The deeper they went, the more the air seemed to change, darker, colder, and filled with the weight of impending danger. As they reached the final level, Rylan could see the glow of lights up ahead, the unmistakable hum of an engine coming from the escape vessel. They were so close, but just as they neared the ship, a sudden explosion shook the ground beneath them, throwing both men off balance. Dust filled the air, and Rylan's vision blurred. He struggled to his feet, his heart racing, and saw Varric ahead, motioning for him to follow. "They're here," Varric shouted over the roar of the blast. "We have to move, now." Rylan nodded, his instincts kicking in. He ran faster, ignoring the pain in his side, and followed Varric to the ship. The sleek, silver vessel stood ready, the engines already primed for takeoff. Without wasting another second, Rylan jumped aboard, and Varric followed close behind, sealing the hatch. The moment they were inside, the ship shot into the air, breaking through the palace's defenses. Rylan could hear the alarms growing fainter as the ship gained speed, racing toward the unknown. As they soared through the night sky, Rylan felt a sense of relief wash over him. But there was no time to rest. The Grastuk Empire was vast, and their pursuit would never stop. And as he looked at Varric, who was silently piloting the ship, Rylan knew one thing: the war for humanity's survival was just beginning.